Welcome everybody to another developer interview here on Game Wisdom for our Perceptive podcast series. Got another great one lined up today. My guests are the husband and wife team behind Grey Alien Games, who have made games such as Regency Solitaire, Shadowhand, and a lot more. And we're going to be doing a little bit of a catch-up, talking about where they are at, and about kind of what it's been like with the indie scene since our last chat. So please welcome to the podcast, Jake and Helen Birkett. How are the two of you doing today?
Hello.
Yeah, I'm doing really well, thank you. Hi, Josh.
Hello. And Jake was telling me just before we started that it's been like 7 years since our last chat. Is that about right?
Yeah, I think so. I think we talked in the Shadowhand development, or maybe it just shipped. Either way, that was sort of 2017 or 18. So it's been a fair while. And like I said to you, we're still going as indies. So, and you're still going too. So that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it's great to have both of you on. And like I always say, I'm always looking for more guests to come on for these casts. So if you are a developer watching and would like to come and talk about your games or just game dev, please reach out. But yeah, it has, again, like even just 1 year feels like it's like 10 years in the game industry these days. So it's definitely been a while. I guess my first question for the two of you then, since it has been so long, for people watching who may not be familiar with Grey Alien, could you talk a little bit more about kind of like what your studio is and a little bit more about your games for like anyone new watching?
You want to mention it, Helen?
Sure. Well, Jake maybe should go first. He started off the studio back in 2005.
Yeah, 2005.
Around then, yeah. And he was working as in-game development for quite a while, and then I came and joined later because I had a whole different career. But anyway, Jake, do you want to say the bunch of games you put out before
I guess, sure.
I showed up on the scene?
Yeah, so I mean, I basically started off, actually I cancelled my first indie game because it was overscoped, it was going to take too long, and I didn't think there was a market for it. And that was a multi-directional scrolling kung fu platform game. And actually, I made a match 3 game with a holiday theme as my first game. And then I made a bunch more, and I actually made 7 match 3 games. I spent some time working for Big Fish Games as a contractor, and even moved my whole family to Vancouver, where I worked for them for a while, and we made a Facebook game and some other stuff. And then when we got back to the UK, that's when Helen suggested making Regency Solitaire, and that's when Helen came on board. So 2013.
Yeah.
So,
that's right, yeah, because I'd been working as a sort of specialist journalist and editor, writing about science mostly. But at one point I had this idea for a game. And I know lots of people say they've got a great idea for a game, and they're always telling developers, "Oh, I've got this great idea for a game." And most developers will probably just sort of groan and go, "Oh no, here we go. This isn't going to be viable," or "Oh yeah, everybody's had that idea before," or whatever. But I must have, struck it lucky, because when I described my pitch for this game to Jake, he said, "Oh yeah, I think that might actually work, and that would serve certain markets, and lots of people would be interested in that, and yeah, maybe that could work." So we got some funding basically, and started to make this game, and it turned out to be Regency Solitaire. And since that, we've worked on a bunch of games together and on some games separately. So we made Shadowhand together as well, which was a kind of combat game with Solitaire as the main driver for the battles. That was fun. Then Jake went on to make Ancient Enemy. I came in a little bit towards the end and did a little bit of work on that, but mainly that was him working with some other developers. Meanwhile, I've gone off and done some work with a couple of other studios, doing some writing with them. So yeah, we've done a whole bunch of things. And then we've circled back around to Regency Solitaire 2, the sequel to the game that we first worked on together recently. And it's actually been really fun, and it's been really nice to kind of revisit those characters and see what happens next in their journey, and to make, like a really nice updated game that kind of just because technology's moved on, like it looks better, it sounds great. It's been really fun, and the fans seem to have liked it. So,
actually, may I just mention that, yes, you did some writing for Going Medieval, which maybe you've heard of, Josh. That was quite a popular, medieval sort of building simulator.
It's a colony sim.
Yeah. And I made T minus 30 with a company called Dejaban, and that was a 30-minute city builder. I don't know if you tried that out, Josh. I should have sent you a key for that, really.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I covered that at one point on the channel
Yeah.
like a while ago.
Yeah, so it was a fast-paced kind of, not really a city builder, more like a score attack RTS, but it was a real departure from what I'd done before, but was very interesting from a game design point of view. And my claim to fame for that game is John Blow played it and said, I endorse this game. Anyway, so that's where we're at. And now we finished Regency 2. In February, we shipped it, and then we did some extras, and then we've had it localized, which has come out on an exclusive portal called Gamehouse, and it will come to Steam in a few weeks. Because they localized it for us for free, they get it for 3 months, right? So
yeah, we're basically
yeah.
rolling that out in a whole bunch of different places and
Yeah.
using all the different opportunities we can to get Regency 2, seen.
Yeah, so Steam was the first thing. It wasn't the last thing. And in fact, I sent another build off today to another site. So we sent it to multiple different sites in a kind of staggered fashion. And in fact, the ones that pay us the most get the game first. So itch.io we love because it gives the highest percentage to developers, where you can change the percentage. Steam, we can grumble about the 30% they take, but it's still better than some other sites we send the game to, these casual portals, where the percentage is reversed in the other direction. So yeah, and then we're planning on what to do next, and we can talk about that as we go along.
We've also done, you've updated it to make a new version that's compatible for Steam Deck, so we've been thinking about that. We've also done a collaboration with Flick Solitaire, which is a mobile game, to put the cards that appear in Regency 1 and 2 into their mobile game, so people can play different types of solitaire. So we've been kind of taking that IP and those characters and sort of seeing what we can do with them and where they might find a home and where people will enjoy them. So that's what we've been doing the last few months.
Fantastic. And for the people watching us right now, again, another thing that, of course, Jake did is, of course, the GC talk from, what was that, like 2008, 2000? I always forget the year about.
Oh, no, it was 2016, actually.
Okay.
So, yeah, 8 years ago, that was still popular. I mean, I meet people, we went to develop in the UK, and people pop up to me and say, I really enjoyed the talk, So it's still doing the rounds. And actually, I'm going to do an updated version of it at a conference soon, but that's not revealed publicly yet.
Being out shortly.
Yeah.
Well, by the time this cast goes up, it may actually be revealed, so we'll see how things go there. But yeah, it's great to have both of you on, and like we were saying like a few minutes ago about like the last time Jake and I spoke back in like 2017, 2018, like the game industry has really, again, like as everyone watching this knows, has really moved rapidly. And one of the things I want to ask the two of you about, I guess the first thing would be kind of like where like the casual market is, because I know with like Regency Solitaire, like a huge draw of that was kind of going for more like of a casual market, again, Big Fish Games. And while the two of you were talking, I was looking up the other studio that I remember who was like kind of big with like the casual scene. That was Artifix Mundi. And I haven't seen like any new games from them since like 2019, 2020. So I guess for both of you, what has been like the casual market been like in the last few years? Has it changed? Has it grown? Kind of like, where is it at?
Well, the thing is with the casual market, the last game we shipped on those sites, the Big Fish Games, Gamehouse, iWin, was Regency Solitaire in 2015. So actually, Regency 2 is the most recent one we've only just shipped, and there were 9 years between those two games. So we didn't deal with the casual market during those 9 years in terms of those specific sites. But what we ended up doing was publishing some casual games on Steam for two of our friends. One of those is the Dual Match team that make Dual Match Solitaire and Dual Match 3 games. And the other games are the Clutter series of games, which are sort of unhidden object games, Joe calls them. So we've been publishing those on Steam and building up a following there. But we have meetings with them every so often just to chat, and they fill us in on what was happening with the casual market. And as Steam has become harder and harder for developers to make money from, as I'm sure you've covered with your other guests, and there's been also the Wholesome Games explosion, which maybe Helen could talk about that as well. the casual portals have still kept going, but with gradually, slowly declining revenues. But they still make enough that we thought we could release Regency 2 on Steam and make a certain chunk there. And it's not a hit game on Steam, let's be clear. It's not the right genre for Steam, is it? You know, something like Ancient Enemy or Shadowhand is better suited to Steam. But we can also release it on those casual portals to make up the rest of the revenue. And, you know, and we think we can repeat that with other games, at least for a few years whilst the casual portals are still around. I mean, they had a huge exodus of customers years ago to first Facebook and then mobile. And so we're dealing with a much smaller audience, and you can't have a hit game on those sites. You can just make a certain amount if you get in the top 10 or whatever, which we aim to do because we release games of the required quality to be able to do that. Would you say that's accurate, Helen?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, we've definitely had some feedback from our other friends who make casual games in the interim period. I think there was a concern, wasn't there, a few years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, like casual is over, you know, it's kind of ending on PC. I mean, everybody's going to be moving to other platforms or just not playing casual games, whatever. Phones, basically, people are going to be playing them on their mobiles and iPads. But as you say, that hasn't completely happened. There's still this remaining market. And it's a bit like the situation, you know, on Steam. We might be saying, well, we're quite a small player on Steam. And if you look at some of the bigger players on Steam, they only have to get, you know, do reasonably well to make an awful lot of money. Well, the pool is much, much smaller for the casual games. But at the same time, if we're pretty sure that our game can be, you know, at the top of the charts for a few weeks, we can still make a respectable amount of money from that venture as long as we price it carefully when we make the game to not overscope it or spend too long on it. So
right. Scope and budget are super important.
So we, you know, and by doing the inverse, which is basically having our friends who make casual games and marketing their games on Steam, you know, we're working in that direction, as it were. But we're now trying to put our own games in the opposite direction. We've just been learning about how those two markets may or may not, you know, they overlap a bit, and they're different. In, you know, there's a lot of real important differences. In the casual market, you get paid a much smaller share, as Jake mentioned, but they do all of your marketing for you. They do it to a captive audience. There's very much clubs where you get a token every month that you have to spend. And if our game, say, it has been the case, is fortunate enough to go to the top of the charts, yeah, there's a good chance we'll make a sale. So, you know, it's that sort of balance between whether we try to be a small fish in a big market on Steam or a bigger fish in a
big fish pond
in a smaller market, but one that still has some legs at the moment. But we've still got to keep an eye on that because, you know, anything could happen.
And earlier today, was it today or yesterday, I took a screenshot of Big Fish Games because if you go to card games, best-selling card games this week are 3 games: Regency Solitaire 1, Regency Solitaire 2, there's 2 versions, a collector's edition, which is more expensive and has more levels, and then a standard edition. All 3 of those are the top 3 games on the Big Fish Games card site. Now, can you imagine if we had the top 3 card games on Steam? Like, I would be, you know, driving around a Rolls Royce and I'd have paid my mortgage up, right? But that's not the case on the casual portals.
It's a much smaller market.
But it's nice to see. Nice to see.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And also it gives us that feedback, obviously, that our audience is still there. They still like the kind of games we make. You know, the portals are still happy to promote them and put them on their front page, etc., etc. So for that audience, for those customers, we're obviously still doing something right, which is reassuring.
Yeah, and actually I should add one quick thing, because I get asked this a lot, Josh, and some of your watchers may be thinking this. Oh, well, can I put my indie game on the casual portals? Now, the problem is these sites only accept games in very specific genres. So we're talking like solitaire games that we make. There's a few variants, but really quite tightly controlled. Match 3s, hidden object games, and hidden object puzzle adventures, which are kind of like, you know, like Dave Gilbert's or Would Your Eyes games, a bit like those, but with no avatar. So they're all first person, really, and you have an inventory at the bottom of the screen. And things like Diner Dash or sort of certain time management games. But a lot of indies make things that are too way out there mechanically that don't fit in those genres, or they have visuals or themes which are not appropriate for these sites. And they have quite dark themes and so on, but they don't go full-on horror or pixel art. They don't do that. You know, there's certain games, like we all know about Plants vs. Zombies. That was an amazing game. Did really well on a lot of like consoles and Steam and stuff, but not that well on the casual sites where it first came out by PopCap because they were a casual game developer. So not every dev can put their game on these sites. You have to make a specific genre, and it's not often ones that indies want to make anyway. They want to do their own thing.
And I think to that point, another thing is with kind of like what games are seeing are popular kind of like on the more mainstream sites, especially the last like 4 to 5 years. Again, for people watching this, we've all have gone through the different cycles of deck building, vampire survivors, or I've heard like 2 different marketing terms right now. Some people have been calling it Survivor's Lake, and some people are calling it Bullet Heaven. Balatro with the whole like gambling style now. And it is, again, like, I kind of want to get both of your opinions on this, again, for being around for so long in the indie space, about kind of like how these cycles kind of rise and then they kind of just like, in some cases, just like quietly disappear. Like, with the Bullet Heaven case, I just got a response from them saying they were going to be trying another Bullet Heaven festival in a few months. But, I mean, if you look at this past year in particular, it has been almost completely dry in terms of Bullet Heavens. And then, like, the year before that, I think I played, like, 30 to 40 of them over the course of 2023.
Well, do you not think it's almost as though some of these genres have kind of an expiration date? So, you know, if you're one of the developers who happens to already be working on something in that genre and one of them goes big, fantastic, you're onto a winner. You can fast follow, and as long as your game looks good and you can market it well, you know, you're going to cash in. The next tier of people will be people who are, you know, super motivated and have the agility to throw something together really fast that isn't as perfected, but they can do some iteration or come up with some rapid follow, fast follow within the first 6 months while the person who loved that original game is still playing it. Beyond that, you know, if you're just the regular studio who has to spin up a whole team and pay for a bunch of art and get funding, by the time you've realistically done your 18 months or however long it takes you to get your game out of the door, everyone else has already got 10, like you said, 30 Bullet Heaven games in their inventory. They're not going to pay for another one unless it's completely, you know, blows it out of the water. Yeah. So that's quite a problem.
Here's a fact for you, Josh. I think these are approximate numbers, but I think, was it 2015 or something, when we started Shadowhand, I think I searched on Steam and there were like 50 or 60 card games. That was it, right? Yeah. And this was before Slay the Spire, because we tried to do something with, you know, turn-based combat solitaire, a unique mechanic. It didn't take off. It did okay, but, you know, but then Slay the Spire came along. And of course, that was the deck builder thing, really, wasn't it? I mean, I know for years we've had Magic the Gathering and stuff like this, but Slay the Spire went big. Everybody copied it in their own way. So you had space themes, this theme, you know, had all different themes. Some of them were good. Some of them improved and innovated. But everybody eventually players kind of got bored of that, and maybe devs were just seeing a lower and lower returns and hearing, you know, and you only had to look at some of the later deck builders, the number of reviews on them to know that they're not selling that well. And a lot of developers use this metric called the box lighter method, where you get the reviews, you multiply them by 30, and that gives you the approximate unit sales. And you can see, okay, this game has probably only sold X thousand units, and it looks great, and it's a deck builder. Should we be wasting our time doing the same thing? Probably not. And that's no doubt happened with Vampire Survivors, almost quicker based on what you're saying. It looks like that was a real flash in the pan, and maybe players kind of got bored of playing that type of thing, or devs just were like, you know, let's just move on. And everybody knows you've got to make city builders now on Steam, right? But now there's a huge amount of those, right? So, and some of those aren't doing very well, right?
Yeah. And I think to Helen's point about either you adopt it really, really fast, or you go like super above and beyond for that space. Like, it's something that we've seen like in a lot of these situations. Like, to your point, Jake, about kind of the deck builders, like Monster Train, I think I like Monster Train more than Slay the Spire, but it did not do anywhere near the same numbers as that. And then we kind of fast forward to something, again, like a Balatro, or even one of my favorite games, Library of Ruina, that kind of did something so, completely, left field that no one ever saw it coming. And it's, I think, getting harder and harder for developers to try and go that far with some of these genres. Because, again, like, as everyone watching, I'm sure the two of you are well aware of, like, we're in this period where a lot of genres are kind of already known. Like, it's very rarely safe to say, I will make the 100% original game that no one has ever seen before. Because, again, like, if you've played any video game, you can kind of trace that DNA very easily.
Yeah, I agree. And something like, is it Balatro or Balatro? Have we ever decided on how to say this?
I've been yelled at by fans for saying wrong. I forget what is the proper pronunciation for it.
I guess I thought Balatro, which incidentally came out the same week as Regency Solitaire 2. But that game quickly said, we sold 1 million copies and then 2 million. And we definitely haven't done anywhere near that. But, there's this thing with which is actually what we did with Regency 2. We got Regency 1 and we said, let's upscale all the graphics. Let's give players something they're familiar with that they can enjoy. They've been waiting for a sequel. So we're not departing too far from that, but we've added in some new things and the whole thing's better quality, right? And so a lot of players do want familiarity in genres, but with a twist, right? This is what we're all looking for, aren't we? The next Vampire Survivors with a twist, bro, tato, whatever it is, right? And the problem is with indies, it's very difficult to take a risk. So, and we know this with AAA, AAA don't want to take risks because of their multi-million, hundreds of millions budgets. And indies, unless you're in a unique financial situation as an indie where you're sitting on a giant pot of cash from past games or you're living in your parents' basement or something, taking a risk is risky. So a lot of them are, trying to kind of make games in familiar genres. So that's partly why you don't see many risks, because they flop. And you only hear about the ones which did well, like Balatro, right? Which incidentally did have a publisher and they did stuff like organize streamers to have a tournament and stuff like this. So there was a whole load of stuff behind it. If that had released with no marketing, perhaps it wouldn't have gone big. I don't know. It's hard to say. I know it's got a unique set of mechanics.
It sounds as though that developer was working behind the scenes as well for many years, sort of honing this idea. I know it sounds as if he's sort of come out of nowhere, and it's that classic kind of just one guy making a thing, it does brilliantly. But as well as the support from the publisher, if you actually read a little bit more into his stuff he's put out there, it sounds as if no, he's not saying that. He's saying he was honing this, testing it, working away, trying to narrow it down to what was really going to work for quite a long time. So that's it's the fruition of a lot of hard work and a lot of testing on his part. And, all power to him. It's a great game.
Yeah. To be fair, Vampire Survivors dev has put out a great 30-minute documentary about how that game came about, and they were testing it on people, and even Slay the Spire. If you talk to them, they tested the game on the NetHack forums or something for ages and ages with players. So a lot of these games that come out of nowhere have been behind the scenes building the community and testing.
Yeah.
But it's a risky maneuver.
I say, if you are trying to do this innovative thing, right from the very beginning of when we start designing our games, we immediately have to say, and this is important if you're going to a publisher or trying to get funding, or if you're doing it yourself and sorting out your own marketing, who is this for? Who is the audience? And it's much easier to design a game thinking, I know who this audience is. They're this age, they play this kind of games. They've definitely played this one and this one before. They read this kind of literature or these comic books or whatever. And then you might make a game that's a lot like one they already play, but with one aspect that's completely new. That's okay. That's a fairly safe bet. But as soon as you throw that out the window and go, I'm just going to make, this fun game. I've had this amazing novel idea. You really don't know who your audience is. You can guess, but unless you're able to take it out and play test it and do a lot of focus groups and things, you really are just, gambling with that. And I say our whole shtick is that we kind of be a small sustainable company. So it wouldn't be smart for us to do that. It really wouldn't.
Well, actually, and to be honest, the safe bets aren't safe bets anymore either in the industry.
Yeah, they're getting less safe.
And the only thing you can do to make them safer is to reduce budget and scope. Well, that's one direction, right? And I think it can work. But if you go below a certain quality or quantity threshold, players won't spend the money on it, right? So, or the other thing is you go to make the best in that genre, so it stands out head and shoulders above everything else, and that's extremely, extremely difficult, And actually, I just was reminded of something. I was talking to a friend earlier about Metroidvanias because we've been playing Blasphemous 2 recently, and also he's been playing the Prince of Persia game, and I was playing Ori. And actually, that is a genre which hasn't had a flash in the pan. It does kind of stick around, doesn't it? Because people have been playing these since Metroid and Castlevania, right? So that's kind of interesting that some genres do have a longer life cycle. And years ago, I was talking to Ryan Clark from Brace Yourself Games. They made Crypto the Necrodancer and some other games. And he thinks there are some genres which are almost evergreen because they tap into some kind of part of the human psyche or evolutionary stuff. So those would be survival type of games, right? And farming games and certain kinds of simulation games, which we still see performing, some of them quite well on Steam. But anyway.
Mm-hmm. And my next book I'm writing is going to be on Metroidvanias too, so that is really great for me.
Interesting.
I think that's a really great point, Jake, about kind of like this idea of like evergreen genres. I do wonder if some of it is just like I don't know if there's a right term for it, but I guess like the malleability or like the number of levers you can pull within that genre. Like if you look at a deck builder, there's only so many ways you can kind of spin that in a new direction. You're, building a deck, you're throwing cards down. If you're either into it or you're not. If you look at something like a Metroidvania, we have seen, brutally difficult ones, casual ones, first-person shooter, third-person, platformer, etc. And maybe it does, like, tap into something that you can get a lot more mileage out that. And to an earlier point, the two of you were talking about kind of, like, how the successes of Balatro and Vampire Survivors, they weren't just, like, someone throwing stuff against the wall and hoping that it turned out well. Like, it's hard, I think, for a lot of developers to kind of comprehend what goes into like these games. And I've said this many times before that there really is no such thing as that game that just magically appears one day. That, Among Us being another example. Like, there are people who only heard about Among Us after it blew up, but again, it was around for several years. I think at least a year before it actually started to get known. And I do feel like, and I'm curious what the two of you think about this, like, I do feel like there is that kind of chase by some developers that have that kind of instant success. That, I don't care about marketing, I don't care about publicizing my game, I'm just going to war this for like 3 to 5 years, I post it on Steam or Itch, the next day, every YouTuber and streamer on the planet covers it, and then, I can retire, the next day.
Hmm.
I think the past has a lot to answer for in the sense that when fewer people were making indie games, and just to give you an example, this weekend our son took part in the Game Makers Toolkit Jam. There was a game jam, and he said to me there were 30,000 other teams making games, right? So, they're our competitors in a way in the market.
Or they will be at some point.
Or they will be, and so there's a lot more people making games now. And so in the past, you did have fewer games for people to write about, to stream, to talk about, and when those ones went big, they went big, really big, because they were like the only example of this type of game. And now it really is just down to we've got so many games. Is the latest one that's coming out standing out beyond something that came out 10 plus years ago? But anyway, so people see this history and think they can repeat that. And I did a tweet the other day that kind of said the people that say you should work for years and years on your dream game and release that, the only people that are saying that are people who are delusional and will never finish. People who did that and were the 1% who actually made a super successful game. We could pick Owl Boy as an example, for example, or there's numerous sort of games that somebody spent a long time on. I think Animal Well was a 7-year development cycle. Yeah, I heard that recently, right? So again, that's done really well.
And then finally the funding aspect as well. Like, if somebody is independently wealthy, some people are. They might have the funds for whatever reason to sit there and spend 7 years making a game and honing it. And if that's what they choose to do, then, fantastic. Just as long as other people who don't have that war chest realize that they're not necessarily on a level playing field when they make their game.
Yeah. There isn't really. And so I think the past has a lot to answer for people thinking they can work for years on these games, release them and make a hit. I mean, it's so rare. That's not our stick, is about sustainable dev. And I saw earlier on Alexander Bruce made Antichamber. He was talking about why are devs making the kind of the same type of games and not sort of new experiences. And I replied to the dev who'd reposted this and said that to make a new experience, you need to be in a financial situation where you can work on that for X years, could be many years, and you have to be able to afford that risk. Or have a massive tolerance for risk, right? And if you've got kids and a mortgage or whatever, your risk tolerance is much lower than someone maybe much younger who can afford to do that. So not everyone can afford to take these big risks. And that's another important note. I mean, if you can, maybe this is a time to perhaps try it. But certainly if you quit your AAA job and you want to, you don't necessarily want to do that, right? So,
but I think as well, it's fair to say that even some of that first crop, Jake, of indies that you perhaps knew better than I did, but I knew some of them also. A lot of them have had a massive standout hit game or two, but some of their follow-up games, they have, scaled up a bigger team, got a bigger studio, been really confident that their idea is great, and done the same again, and it hasn't proven repeatable. So there is something to do with market forces that is greater than the sum of your experience at times.
And some people are big enough to admit that they were successful because it was right time, right place. And some people still think they were geniuses in the game development field and can repeat that, which is, I think, a dangerous.
Some of them did have both. Some of them were geniuses, but we even know some people who we would perhaps consider geniuses whose follow-up games haven't done that well not as well as expected for whatever reason, and it's something intangible.
And there was even that thing about Braid Anniversary recently, not really. Jonathan Blow was quoted as saying it sold like something unpleasant. And he said himself it didn't sell that well.
I think he maybe followed that up with some qualifiers to maybe.
He qualified that it's profitable, but that's because he made a platform deal with it, which gave him the money.
It wasn't the massive reissue kind of talking point that perhaps he'd hoped it would be.
Yeah, and as another interesting point, we had the sequel to the Moon came out, I think, last year. And
I didn't even know that, and I loved the original.
No, I completely forgot about it too. And To the Moon was again, back in when it was first released, that was one of the most famous indie games of that time. And the sequel just it popped. No one ever heard about it. And to Helen's point about that kind of keeping that studio going, again, it's one of the reasons why I like talking to the two of you, and from our last conversation about this idea of sustainability, that I'm working on a talk that I want to give about, there is that tendency from a lot of developers that, okay, if I sold my first game, let's say it made 200,000 copies, if I double the budget, if I triple the team, maybe I can sell 1.2 million copies. But to go back to what we were saying a few minutes ago, this idea of evergreen genres or kind of the market for it, if the market isn't there, the market isn't there. I was saying about this with Me Games, they kept trying to grow the kind of tactical stealth strategy genre the last 7 or so years. They weren't getting new people. There's only so many people who will play a game like that, just as there's so many people who will play a deck builder or a solitaire game or, pick anything like that. And I think there is that reckoning from a lot of developers that you can't, I think, will more people to play your game. There are, obviously, when it comes to marketing and perception, you're never going to reach 100% of them unless you already are a big name. But if you think that if I make the most perfect first-person shooter or the most perfect survival horror game, that it will sell the same number as Call of Duty or Destiny or anything like that, it just never happens. I don't think we've ever been proven wrong in that respect.
Yeah, and even when people use I only need to sell to 1% the amount of Call of Duty, and that is a huge number still, a number we'd be very happy to sell Solitaire to.
Yeah. I think as well, some things came out recently, didn't they, about saying what games do people actually play, and it was saying people often do, looking at people's Steam libraries, and certain people will go out and try and buy all kinds of different things, but a lot of people do just have favorites, not even favorite genres, but a favorite game, a comfort game that they like to go back to. We've all got some comfort games, but the question is, how much outside of that do people have the time and money to be buying and trying new examples even of that genre, or are they just still playing, you know, their game from 5 years ago, 10 years ago that they loved?
Well, there's
that's it.
Fortnite and Roblox taking up time, and there's always this sort of, you know, and there's sometimes these new seasonal games or Destiny or whatever that people are playing, and they're not necessarily looking for new ones. And years ago, I was on a train and I was talking to some guys and about making games, and I said, oh, you know, I put them on Steam, and I said, what do you play on Steam? And they all said, oh, they play Football Manager, and that was it. No indie games. So I think the type of people who play indie games are unusual. And Dan Cook called them curiosity seekers once. Dan Cook was the inventor of Triple Town and many other games. So, you know, curiosity seekers are only a small percentage of Steam's 130 million users. And then we're all jostling in that same space for those games. And one thing we've done, though, Josh, to be clear, is some games came out, hit games 10 years or more ago, and then those developers didn't release anything since, and maybe they sat around by their pool and then eventually thought, I'll make another game, which they may have scaled up, spent a lot of money on, and they release a game and that fan base has moved on. They're not interested in them as a developer. Even the game, they're like, okay, yeah, that was my distant past. What we've tried to do is release, you know, we did Regency Solitaire, then we did Shadowhand, then we did Ancient Enemy, then I did another thing, and then we've come back to Regency 2. So we've got this sort of thing where we are keeping the fans alive and the interest there. So when our next game comes out, they're still around and they're on social media and they've got a newsletter. And if you haven't done all of that, it's kind of like a shot in the dark or relying on past fame or the press to cover you, you know, which they hardly cover anyone now, right? Because they can't. So does that all make sense about how we've kept things alive by releasing games and talking to the community?
Yeah, and I think that is a really good point about this idea that you can just kind of disappear as a game developer. And I think one of the things that actually brings up a very interesting question I want to ask the two of you about. Wait, when we talk again, like game dev is this like very like weird space when it comes to like time and how things have changed. Like if we were talking 10 years ago, maybe even 7 years ago, like 2014, 2017, that period, a lot of the indie developers and a lot of these studios kind of became very like homogenized around like a singular idea or a singular brand. If you look at, again, like the stuff like the deck builders, one of my contacts, Chris Park from Arkin with AI Wars, like there's this idea that the studio should only make one game, or there should be like one kind of like singular brand identity of it. And then when we fast forward to today, and you look at kind of like the larger indie studios that have been kind of keeping themselves like on the pulse of things, stuff like Kit Fox, Clay Entertainment, they have, I think, diversified their games a lot more like the past like 7 years. Like Kit Fox goes from like something like Boyfriend Dungeon to publishing Dwarf Fortress. Clay has done, they've done Colony Sims, they've done platformers, they've done beat 'em ups. Like it feels like for a lot of indie studios today, it is more about kind of like the reputation of the studio, like kind of keep it again like in the public eye, rather than just saying we're going to make this one game or this one concept, and we're just going to do it again and again and again for like the same audience. So I'm just wondering, like, what has been like your thoughts on like kind of like how like indie brands or indie studios have really changed, or have they changed in the last like 7 to 8 years?
I think Clay hasn't really, because I know that it's initially made Shank 1 and 2, and those were platform games. They did a deal with Microsoft, and then Mark of the Ninja, right? But after Don't Starve, which was their biggest hit, that's an absolutely massive game. They have kind of stuck, well, that was a survival game, but they've done like Oxygen Not Included, which was a simulation game, then Grifflands, a card game, and a few other things. So I think they're still trying to stick with their art style, which is kind of unique to
Yeah,
their
I'd say their
studio.
games are quite easy to identify by their look.
Yeah, and they have stuck to a certain extent with the genre. And I was talking to some people, really some devs, about Hooded Horse, this publisher who published Manor Lords and a bunch of other sort of strategy simulation games. So as a publisher, they're actually quite focused. And there are a lot of publishers that are quite scattergun. They don't really have an identity. Though we publish casual games on Steam, so people are getting to know us. So, and we have stuck with the same genre, and there's a good reason for that. One is you can reuse your engine. Yeah, we've we've done it with Match 3 and Solitaire, but we can reuse our engine over and over, but change the theme and add new mechanics and improve it. So each time the game gets better and better and better, right? And we've got domain knowledge. We become experts in Solitaire. Like, I could talk to a novice Solitaire game dev about all the pitfalls to avoid and all that kind of stuff. So there's benefits to sticking to the same thing and either building your brand around what type of games you produce rather than as a studio. I mean, we're kind of sitting on the fence there because people know us as Gralien Games and pick up all of our games, but they are similar-ish, except for T-30. Do you have any thoughts on that, Helen?
I mean, I think one thing to mention as well is that Clay probably is a AA studio at this point. I mean, it's moving in that boundary at the very high end of indie, isn't it? They do have a lot of employees and several teams working on several things at once. Yep. And I have a feeling as well there's a certain amount of, as you would imagine in a larger studio, that redundancy of you can punt 3 projects and kill the 2 that aren't winning, right? So that's a luxury that a smaller indie studio wouldn't have, not having multiple teams at any rate. There's a little voice going on in the background. I'm not sure what that is. Anyway, yeah, and I can't remember what my other point was. I got distracted by the background.
I guess like the idea was like have like indie studios in terms of, I guess like the brand strategy. Like is it more about trying to build like a successful series, or is it more about building like a successful studio and kind of like what games are working on is almost, I wouldn't say ancillary, but it's more important that the studio kind of builds itself up rather than just we're going to make every game, the same exact style or the same exact theme.
I mean, I did give a talk a while ago about marketing at a meta level and at a specific level. I mean, I think we, as Gralien Games, it's kind of unusual that we're called Gralien Games. We probably should have been called Regency Bodice Ripper Games or something like this. But other than naming aside, we have put out some branding of ourselves as a husband and wife couple. We've shown pictures of ourselves in Regency costumes. When we did Shadowhand, we had some pictures of ourselves in earlier costumes. And then we make these kind of games with a romantic historical theme. And that's an example of branding, not at the game level, but at the studio level, right? Of us saying we, and it's honest. I mean, it's not kind of a ploy. We love that kind of stuff. We love those historical locations. We love historical dramas and things. That's kind of what we're into in our spare time. So it comes very naturally for us to do that. And I think that's also, in a peer-to-peer sense, that's what we would put across to other developers and other people working in the industry, that this is our kind of shtick. This is what we do. And I think other studios more or less successfully, have a flavor. And I think that's a little bit what you're talking about. It's quite even Kitbox. I mean, you're saying they have done very different games. To me, from a distance, I can see a certain customer, and they look pretty similar. Actually, they might play those different genres, but they've got a certain sort of art style, a certain type of game they would pick up or be
with their own games. Yeah, Dwarf Fortress was the departure, I guess, because they were friends in the prop gen space with Tarn. But
I can see some similarities. Yeah. I mean, there's lots of other studios as well. I mean, this studio that makes Fallen London, for example, all of their games have a specific flavor and a specific Victorian, kind of look, and they've got a whole fan base that not just interacts with them at a game level, but at a studio level. And I think of other examples, but there's definitely a kind of meta brand marketing or brand presence thing, which is to some fans and some players, that's important in how you engage with them. Not all. Some of them will just play a game and they couldn't care less who made the last game or the next game or if it's from the same studio. But some people do pick up on that.
I mean, I haven't put, Jake Birkett's Match 3, I haven't done that with the games. And some people say you're only as good as your last game. Certainly when you're pitching to publishers and so on, that you're only as good as your last game. So there is that to bear in mind. I think there's a range of people who want to know the creators, those who don't care, who only want to know, did you make good games? And those who don't even care, they just see a game pop up and it's cool and they play it. So I guess there's a range.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes back to a point you were saying earlier about kind of how the people who consume games these days, there are a lot of people who they will just find that one game or that one particular genre and that's it. You can tell them about this is the greatest platform, but if I'm a football fan or a survival horror fan, I wouldn't care less about that. And I do wonder how much kind of like influencer and streamer culture has really affected things in that respect. Because a lot of people who cover like varieties of games, not just myself, it's one part about kind of like trying to market these games. I think another is about trying to share them to a greater range of people. Because going back to the point I was saying a few minutes ago about kind of like where or how much of a market there is for these games, like I kind of have that challenge is that a lot of people just don't know about them. Like if you were like you were mentioning like city building a few minutes ago, like the automation Factorio thing, like Factorio blew up because there was like no other game like it in town. And then probably like the second biggest one in that respect would be Dyson Sphere program.
Yeah.
And it is kind of like that case of like, and I think it goes back to kind of like the consumer awareness. Like people who know their genre, they know their genre. Like if you ask a city builder fan, what are the next 5 city builders, they'll be able to yammer that off. If you ask someone who's never played a city builder what is coming out, they'll have no idea. And I think a lot of that challenge is about kind of like the information out there. And this is something that I've been struggling with as trying to cover these games. That I don't cover just one genre. I try to cover as many as I can, but that kind of dilutes that message. Like if I just said on my channel, I will cover nothing but deck building games. Yep, I'll get a lot more deck building audience people. That just says like screw it to everyone else. But in order for those games to blow up, like people have to know that there's a market for it. But it's that annoying catch 2022 that it seems to be kind of like at the heart of some of the issues when it comes to indie marketing.
And I mean, it's tough for variety streamers as well in that sense. I know Splattercat was a variety streamer. I think it's taking a break from some aspects now, but because you're trying to then appeal to the curiosity people who like a whole variety of games that aren't genre specialists. And I think it is kind of easy to appeal to maybe one specific genre. I mean, especially then there's type of genres that make for good streams, because as a variety streamer, not every game makes for a good stream, right? Yeah. Like it might play fine, but it's not maybe exciting or engaging enough for people watching. Unfortunately, I fear that our solitaire games may be that kind of game compared to other type of games with random runs like roguelites or FPS games where there's action and whatever. So you've got to have the right type of game. I just remembered another point. One of the things we've been okay with is repeating genres, whereas so a lot of indies make one game and then change everything up for the next game, and that's because they're sick of spending 2-3 years on the same thing and they want to try something new. Totally get why, but for us, we constrain to like reusing the engine in the game. And if I need to scratch the itch of making something else, I've done game jams or mini projects, and that can help with that thing. But too many indies change engine, which is a whole new tech stack you've got to get used to, and then genre. And we saw this a lot in the last year or so with people moving from Unity because of some stuff Unity did to either Unreal or Godot, and then they've had to recode everything and learn the foibles of that system and fix all the bugs. So
and like to that point, like as you were saying earlier about the social media post about just working on your dream game, as I was reading that, I could feel like my skin crawling as I was like reading some of the responses on that. And it kind of again goes back at this challenge of building a sustainable studio. And it's something again that I know the two of you, as we've been talking, are very aware of, and something that I've said a lot here, that it is that challenge. I think it's something that a lot of developers don't tend to think about, is this idea of, where am I going to be in the next 5 years? You can, think I will work on this one game for 2 to 3 years, 5 to 7, whatever. But what do you do after that? And that is a very hard question for a lot of people to answer.
Well, I mean, if you're banking on a hit game, that's a mistake. But some people get that and they can do whatever. Maybe just having a game that's vaguely profitable enough to make a game number 2, that's a big goal. I mean, Chris Zukowski on his, howtomarketagame.com has a chart with the number of devs on Steam who've made one game, and it's like this, and the number of devs that have made 2 games, and it's like this, and then we're at 15 games, right? And it drops off sharpish after 1, and the ones that have made 2 have a bit better chance. So, it is harsh. I mean, for us, we know we've got a lot of games out there, and they've all got a long, thin tail, and those tails all stack up like layers of rock formation, and they gradually build in a certain amount of background revenue, which is useful to us. But we still need to release new titles to add another layer the whole time, and the layer's getting thinner. So you've got to think longer term, in my opinion. And this will be our 20th year next year. So I mean, I guess we're doing something right, but we haven't got rich. But it's been a lifestyle, and it's been a good lifestyle, right? I went and sat in the garden with Helen today when it was sunny, and we discussed the plot for Regency Solitaire 3. So it's all good.
Yeah.
One other major point about kind of like making like a sustainable game, and something that the two of you have been talking about, is the idea of trying that the challenge of taking a genre and kind of going like over the top, like taking a platformer or a shooter and saying, I will make and it doesn't matter if it takes 3 years, 7 years, 10 years, whatever. And about kind of like if that is a sound strategy. And one of the things I was talking about this about like a year or so ago, I chatted with Dave Oshry from New Blood. And since Dusk, and even with like Ultra Kill and Gloomwood, like there's been this flood of boomer shooters, arcade shooters, tactical shooters, like every kind of shooter you can imagine. And even like the modding scene has been getting more and more recognition in this space. Like GZ Doom mods, the Doom plus Doom 2 remaster just came out about a few weeks ago from our recording. And there's this, I think, idea from a lot of developers of trying to, over polish a genre. Like there is that case, as both of you are aware, and I'm sure the audience is aware of, that you can't make a lower quality game anymore. Like if you just say, I'm going to make, worse Doom, no one's going to give that game the time of day. But there's also this case of people, again, trying to overcommit, that I will, create the ultimate shooter. I will spend no matter how much money, how much time, and I will create that perfect shooter, the one that will, rival Dusk. Or, the one that will rival Mario as a platformer. And it seems like that kind of like overcommitment, this is again something that, like if we were talking 10, 12 years ago, I heard this from a lot of indie developers, that I'll spend 8 years working on a game, or 7 years, and I will make, again, goes back to this idea of that dream game. But it seems like the market has kind of like cooled off from that even like consumers aren't really interested in playing the 150-hour magnum opus shooter or Metroidvania anymore. So I kind of want to get both of your thoughts on this. Like, we've talked again so much about indie development, but has this idea of the perfect game kind of gone by the wayside in recent years?
I mean, I guess making games is like a craft, isn't it? It's like any other. And if you look at artists or great masters or whatever, I mean, they don't, very few would be sticking their first painting up and saying, right, that's it, that it took me 3 years, that's my masterwork, right? They'd be painting for years and years and years, and making mistakes and making iterations of similar paintings, and learning about different things, and going back over the same ground, right, to perfect. And then eventually, their 50th painting, their 100th painting, whatever, would be the masterwork. This is the reality for most people, unless you're like Leonardo da Vinci or someone. That's what's going to happen. And I think if you think of any other trade, you pick any other trade, from like plumbing to woodwork to financial stuff, whatever, right? It's practice makes perfect. Why would someone think that committing more time and money to a project early in their career would automatically pay off? It seems a little bit unlikely. So maybe making shorter things and failing, trying things out, experimenting, honing your craft, with lower stakes seems like the way to go, and then deciding when and where to commit to a bigger project later on.
I mean, we used to say in the casual game industry that people start to get good about their 5th game. right? And for me, that was Fairway Solitaire, which I was a contractor for Big Fish Games, and that did do really well. So it took several games. I mean, there's an appeal to making a giant game that you never release, because if you don't release it for years, which is a form of procrastination, you can't be critiqued. You can't be judged on the outcome of the game. And therefore, it's quite nice to just keep noodling away. Because when you release it, people speak with their mouths and their wallets, you know. And so, yeah, and the reviews. And so you have to be ready for that, right? But yeah, if you can keep releasing, you can keep practicing and honing the craft. I think that in the past, people were able to spend longer on these bigger games because there were fewer games coming out. They got talked about, especially when they were the first great example in that genre. Or we saw stuff like Stardew Valley coming out, you know, and when nobody played that type of game for a long time, you know. But these days, it's risky. There are some people, I think, that can produce the best and may succeed, but it's difficult. But we, believe it or not, we actually try and do that with our Regency Solitaire games, because there are other Solitaire games that are made much, much quicker, and they get much worse reviews on the casual portals. But our ones get constant 5-star reviews on those sites. And we spent 2 years on Regency Solitaire. You know, we weren't 100% flat out at all times, but we made it as best we could, and that's because we want to own that space of the best solitaire games with a story that play like this. It's a very specific niche, but I think that we do that, right? So there's always a chance for indies to try and do that, be the best at your specialist thing, and then you don't have to be the best Doom killer or the best, you know, mega Metroidvania platform killer, something that's going to take you years. You could maybe reduce the scope and be the best in a smaller area, like people who are getting really good. Alan Hazelden does all these puzzle games, right? And he's made himself into a puzzle game publisher now, and then knows what he's doing in that space. So you can own a space, maybe that's your space, or Wadget Art Games, right? You know, so great examples of people owning that space and making the best in those genres now in that space. So I think that's an option instead of the biggest in a very crowded space. Then again, I love Metroidvania. So if somebody wants to kill themselves making one for 10 years for me and for you to write your book about, then I'll happily play it.
Yeah, and I think it's always that challenge of trying to balance between, I want to go all out on a specific genre. I want to, again, do something unique and original. Because you can't, as we were saying, you can't do like unique and original short. You can't just say, I will create something no one's ever seen before and will only take me 20 days. That's never going to happen. But again, conversely, saying, well, if it takes 15 years to make it, how are you funding that? How is that game ever going to break even? Because again, like, as another important point, again, we could just sit here and chat for like the next like 4 to 5 hours on these conversations, that uniqueness also doesn't guarantee success as well. I have played, I'm sure the two of you have seen, dozens and hundreds of unique games that no one's ever played before. And sometimes the reason no one has ever played before because it's not a good idea, or just it doesn't feel right. And it is that balance, I think, of familiarity versus that unique stamp. Like, to your point about being on like the casual portals, that there are, again, like when it comes to like solitaire style games, casual games, there are an infinite number of them at this point, if we talk about like mobile as well. But making the one that people want to play, that is a lot harder. And again, I think it cuts at that point that a lot of people will look at genre and say, well, you know, there's all these platformers, or there's all these shooters, or, you know, look at Balatro. Let me just copy that and my game will do well. Going back to that point about, you know, if I just have like 1% of Call of Duty, then I'll be successful. But getting a game to that point, and more importantly, be able to have a studio that can keep going, that is the far harder task. And as we've said, like, I think more developers need to realize just how hard it is to be able to survive to that point.
Yeah, to release one game that does well enough that you can make the other one. But that's why I think most devs' first games should be done whilst they have a job, or, you know, whilst they're in a financial situation where there are low stakes, and not spend much money on it, and actually learn the whole process of making a game, shipping and marketing a game, watching it probably fail, and then picking yourself up again and making another one and trying to do everything a bit better and then doing that and maybe building an audience along the way, until you're finally ready to take more of a risk and investment, or someone else's money, publisher money, or grants or funding and tax breaks, all these other options to make a game. But yeah, I mean, we actually tried with Shadowhand to make the best game that we could at the time, and that was nearly 3 years. And I was really trying to perfect every part of that game. Helen was warning me against it, and she was right. I wanted to make sure it was the best possible offering we could do for our first kind of proper Steam game. And it did pretty well, but it didn't get the numbers we or the publisher really wanted. And I realized, wow, we can't afford to do that again. And that's why Ancient Enemy was done in half the time using the same engine, but various scope things. But I spent a lot of time at the beginning refining the gameplay with and I think it's actually better design. And we're trying to do games quicker. Regency Solitaire 2 years is actually too long, and we aim to make the next one quicker, Regency Solitaire 3. So
yeah, I guess with Regency Solitaire 2, it's taken 2 years to kind of finally output it. But if in terms of actual hours of game dev, it hasn't taken any longer than some of our earlier games. I think it's more that we've been doing a lot of other things at the same time, like publishing other people's games.
Yeah, and biz dev and just running your business.
Yeah, other stuff, side quests.
Yeah, so it sounds long, but it was too long really for players, like who've waited 9 years from the other one. We should have done sequels earlier, and in fact Cliff Harris is always saying more indie devs need to make sequels and do them quicker and not scale up the team too big. And like the Hand of Fate games, we had Hand of Fate 1 and then 2. I don't think there was a 3, was there? 2 didn't sell, it was a bigger team, bigger effort, and then boom, they fizzled out, right? So a lot of games scale up too big, and we haven't done that. There's the two of us and contractors, so that works for us anyway. Everyone's different, hey? And there's hobby games and there's commercial games, but if you're trying to survive and you don't have a big war chest of money, you've got to try and make sensible decisions. Which isn't thrilling. It's not the kind of exciting indie lifestyle and the stories we hear about or that make it into the press. But we're still here, and we've seen countless indie companies fold or individuals fold. We've seen distribution sites come and go, platforms come and go, publishers come and go. We're still here. We're still here.
Yep, and I think that is a good point to sort of wrap things up on, because again, like when it comes to like this kind of stuff, we can, this is like an easy 3 to 5 hour conversation if we had the time. And the two of you free in the future, I'd love to catch up, keep it less than 5 years or less for the next one.
Yeah, it'd be great to talk maybe after we released another game. But yeah, I've got a pizza to cook.
I have lunch eat at some point as well. So I guess to wrap things up for our conversation today, I guess the first question is, you mentioned Regency Solitaire 3. Any other projects or anything else you want to promote or mention to the audience?
We have a bunch of projects, don't we, in the works?
Why don't you mention Shadowhand Solitaire?
Yeah, well, we just mentioned that Shadowhand took us rather a long time, and it was aimed at the Steam audience, and because possibly it had too many features and too much content. So we're working on a kind of slimmed down version of Shadowhand that has the combat done differently, and as a result, it's going to be for the casual player instead. It's going to be a little bit more like playing Regency Solitaire. So we thought we'd like to bring that story and those characters to that audience who hasn't seen it yet. Also, obviously, we've just come out with Regency Solitaire 2 recently, so they will hopefully be looking out for another game from us, and we'll be able to, sell it on that basis. So that's exciting. That's one exciting thing we've got brewing, and
to be clear, we've removed the turn-based combat. So you just play the level, and if you beat the level, you win, and if you lose the level, if you don't clear all the cards, you lose. So we've slimmed it down. It's a lot. You maybe wouldn't like it as much, Josh, but it's going to be much more like playing a story game and you just beat the levels and it's nice. But with
basically, it was an RPG game, so we've stripped out a lot of what made it an RPG, basically, and made it more like just an elaborate, a rather elaborate solitaire game. But that's fine because the characters were great, the stories were great, the music was great. Yeah, we had a lot of love for that game, so it would be great to give it another outing. So that's one thing we're working on.
We will actually, as well as the casual portals, we'll put it back on Steam, but at lower price than the original game because there's sort of slightly less to it. But we think that people who maybe bounced off the first game, who wanted less combat and more story like our other games, will check it out and give it a look. So that's That's one thing we're doing, and it doesn't cost us anything external because we don't need new art. It's just our time to make it, and that's kind of nearly done, right? So
yeah, as I say, we put the game out on Flick Solitaire recently. Basically, they have a game and they reskin the cards, so that's another place where you can find our cards and our art style, which we've redesigned to suit mobile. So yeah, you can check out our cards on Flick Solitaire. That's a fairly new thing. What else have we got in the works? Well, I've been designing Regency Solitaire 3 for a while in the background. It's going to be set. It's definitely going to be set in Scotland. The working title is Regency Solitaire 3: A Highland Fling. And it's going to feature some characters from before and a whole new bunch of characters as well, and beautiful Scottish scenery. We've already been up to Scotland, taken a bunch of photos and looked around and added to our bank of ideas. The plot's beginning to come together, so I'm excited for that.
Yeah. And one thing we've just been discussing recently, whether we do this is another thing, but I don't know, Josh, if you know, the last Match 3 game I made was called Spooky Bonus in 2013, and it was a Halloween-themed Match 3. It was my 7th one, and it was the most successful one by far. It did really, really well. Stupidly, I never made a sequel. But we're in talks about making a collector's edition, an HD version, higher res, maybe some more levels, some more features, and then using that to make a sequel. So it seems weird going back to Match 3, because especially as they don't sell that well on Steam, but they do sell really well on the casual portals, better than Solitaire. So we might end up with a Spooky Bonus 2. Watch your space. Can't say for sure, but it's...
Yeah, I mean, we've had a good journey, haven't we, with revisiting Regency Solitaire 1, and we found that in that time, obviously, we've both learned more stuff, and I say the technology has even just moved on, the resolution of the screens has moved on, things have got better, so we can make a more beautiful, even nicer version with even more bells and whistles that we enjoyed doing. So yeah, why not apply that magic
Spooky
sauce
Bonus,
to Spooky Bonus, which was a really fantastic game that everybody really
very
loved.
highly rated, successful game. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but if you like Match 3, it's good. And we can look at modern Match 3s, see what kind of new features and mechanics are in there, and come up with some twists of our own and put that in a sequel, right?
Yeah.
So those are some ideas we have for the time being.
Nice. All right. So I guess in terms of social media, anything the two you like to promote, where you can find Grey Alien, stuff like that?
I mean, the first place I'd send developers would be our Patreon. Yes, you can pay and become a member and get some behind-the-scenes data type posts, but there's also plenty of posts that are available for free on there. So do check out our Patreon. If you go to Patreon and just type Grey Alien Games, you will find us. There's a big back catalogue of stuff, a whole bunch of sections, some dev diary sections. There's a bunch of data sections. There's stuff about how to do promotion and marketing, all kinds of stuff. So that's a really good place to check out for developers.
Yeah, and then I'm on Twitter as Grey Alien, and Helen's on there as BC Heza. So they're the other two places, really. I mean, I'm on Blue Sky as well. I don't go to it as much as Twitter. X, I should be calling it these days. It takes me a while to catch up with the name change.
And if anybody's really into just hearing news about our latest games specifically and the games we publish, you can go to our website, greyaliengames.com, and sign up to our newsletter, which is specifically about deals of happening with our games and what's coming out. We don't talk about the development side so much there. That's more consumer focused, but you're more than welcome to sign up.
And we've got a Facebook page, and that's because a lot of our casual audience, are boomers or whatever, and still use Facebook. We don't actually have a Discord server, unlike all the cool new indies. But even the things we've said gives you some example of several ways that indies have to market themselves anyway, right? Plus, we always send out announcements on Steam via our publisher page, so people can follow our publisher page on Steam. And we're on itch.io. You can follow us on itch.io. So
we're in a bunch of places. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think with that, we can wrap things up. So to kind of, I guess, tie a bow or tie a ribbon on this conversation, for developers watching, do you have any final words of wisdom, any final thoughts about any dev to scare everyone who's tuning in right now?
Anything from you, Helen?
Try and finish it and ship it, whatever it is. Even if that means making it shorter, cheaper, and not being a massive success, finishing it is all that counts.
Yeah, I would say start small, which helps you finish things and do that safely. So, whilst you've got a safe situation where you can make some games, get used to the whole experience, Don't make your dream game off the bat. Wait till you're highly experienced and know what you're doing before doing that. So, yeah, ship your games soon and often and build skill.
All right.
Get good.
There you go. All right. Well, for both of you, thanks again for coming on. Like I said, if you are free in the future, especially around the time Reaching Solitaire 3 is out, or the kind of solitaire version of Shadowhand, we can certainly have another conversation.
Sounds cool, Josh. Thanks ever so much for inviting us on today. It's been an interesting conversation.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep, not a problem. I always love having these. So, for the people watching, we're going to be wrapping things up for today. You'll find links to everything that Jake and Helen mentioned from social media down below. If you're enjoying this on YouTube, do the YouTube stuff. Buy all the books. Start pre-ordering the Metroidvania book that I haven't even typed one word yet of it at the time of recording this. And you'll find my social media links as well. And as I said at the start, if you are a developer working on an upcoming game and like to come on and talk about it, please reach out. So, for both of you, thanks again for coming on, and best of luck with Regency Solitaire 3.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. So, again, be sure to come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. And until our next conversation, have a great night.